Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Cal Goodall. In a week where West Ham, Hello, wait, hang on a second. What season is this? 1-2-0 away at St James's Park. A fantastic result, a much improved performance. What joy we get to do a nice podcast about a West Ham win, eh?
Yeah, a nice dose of positivity as we head into the Christmas period. But yeah, very, very pleasing. I think the main thing for me was I was actually sort of towards the last 10 minutes just really praying for the clean sheet. I think that will probably mean as much as the win, based on some of the performances we've seen and some of the issues that we flagged with regards to how vulnerable we've looked. And I think, yeah, that was the most pleasing aspect for me. Obviously, we'll dive into it in great detail, but just sort of it seemed as though for the first time we'd really recognised that was a glaring weakness and we'd taken steps to address it and it had paid off. So yeah, obviously immense step up across the board really from every individual, and it felt like a real collective performance, again, probably for the first time this season. But yeah, I think it was the defensive sort of discipline, willingness to just dig in, whether that was digging in the box or whether it was like sort of harassing the Newcastle players in midfield and sort of forcing those turnovers. It was, yeah, really pleasing to watch. And if this is a sign of things to come, then I'm certainly feeling a lot more positive about this run that we've got coming up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely the first time this season, I think that we've seen a really clear collective spirit. I don't think a collective identity was necessarily clear from minute one, but it definitely emerged as the game went on, and that was fantastic to see. We finished the game. You know, we had an incredible second half. We played brilliantly in the second half, and I think by the end of the second half, you felt this, well, there's an identity. The team itself has kind of shown what its identity is on the pitch. And we've desperately needed that. And it's fantastic to see that finally happen. It's taken way too long, but we won't spend this podcast talking about how long it's taken because we've whinged more than enough about West Ham.
That would be really shit.
Yeah, exactly. More than enough about West Ham so far this season. But a good place to start discussing this game, I think, is actually in sort of a point that I always like when we get to talk about it, which is that sometimes putting in a more attacking lineup out on paper, we see Paquetá and Soler both in the team for this one. We see our in-possession approach happening with Paquetá and Soler at the base of the midfield and Souček further forward. And in many ways that probably makes us just to begin with feel a bit nervous about how the midfield will function. Definitely for a big physical battle away from home against Newcastle with Bruno Guimaraes, with Joe Linton, with Sean Longstaff, with Tonali to come on into it. But this was a classic example of more attacking lineup doesn't necessarily mean more attacking football team. And it led to a massively improved defensive performance, not just in terms of our ability to build up and play through without losing the ball so regularly, without turning the ball over in bad areas so often, but also actually in terms of our ability to defend as a unit without the ball from the very start, from the first man right to the back of the team, not just in settled defensive situations, but also in terms of our counter press moments where we immediately lost the ball and pressed to try and win it back. Everything functioned to a much higher level with and I don't want to give it credit to just those two, but with those two in the team, that's a nice starting point for us to talk about all of those big changes in the team performance.
Yeah, 100%. I was very surprised actually that was the lineup that we went out with. I wouldn't have anticipated it, as you say. I think given the physical battle that we expected and that we saw really play out, I was surprised that both Guido and Edson were absent. And I think it speaks to two things. I think you would assume that Soler and to a lesser extent Paquetá would get overrun in that, not overrun, but out-muscled probably in that midfield with the players that they were going up against. And whilst I think that's probably true shoulder to shoulder and probably certainly head to head, but I think ankle to ankle is probably the way to describe it, with the way that the sort of Soler and Paquetá combination allowed us to just be a lot more tenacious, a lot more front footed, and the willingness to just snap into tackles, whether they were going to win it or not, I think suits the counter pressing style that we saw in moments. And I think also benefits us massively in a game where you're going up against Bruno Guimaraes, who wants to be involved in those duels. You need, rather than one player, there's not an obvious one-on-one for Guimaraes to get involved. It's essentially a two-on-one where both Soler and Paquetá want to harass him, want to get involved in those same games, almost those same sort of moments where you're laughing and jeering at each other because of how sort of aggressive it's become. And I thought that was a really pleasing thing to see and not something I expected. And then you obviously get the added benefits of how much they offer you in build up, both of them constantly looking to receive off the defenders rather than Edson and Guido, who, fair play, they do look to receive, but then I don't think they necessarily look to turn out and play vertical passes forward in the same way that Paquetá and Soler were constantly trying to do. And I think it really allowed us to build through the thirds, obviously a lot more quickly, but sort of whilst we did still go long quite a lot, it didn't feel as though we were just pumping long all the time. It felt like there was a bit more of a connective tissue.
Well, we just weren't as reliant on it. Like that's the big difference, is that we saw a team that could progress through the middle as well as going long at times when necessary. Probably a little bit too much, and we'll talk about Fabianski later and how still we have this issue with the goalkeeper and being able to be press resistant as a unit from the back, and the goalkeeper undermining that somewhat. But I think Guido's had fantastic moments in build up. It's worth saying. I'll just pass over to you in a sec. But the big thing that changes with both of them in the team together is that there isn't then this overwhelming pressure on just one of them to be the creative player for the team. They were able to exchange responsibility for those creative moments. And I mean, definitely in the second half, it meant that and I'm not surprised, really. I mean, when Soler was signed, that we didn't know if we'd ever see them in the same lineup together. We thought it probably wouldn't happen without one of them shifting wide. We didn't imagine really that we'd see too many examples of them playing in the middle together. But I remember we said the second that Soler arrived, finally a passing target for Paquetá and someone to combine with in the middle. And it was so obvious that with that sharing of the load for creation, you got two players that were so much better on an individual level as a result.
Yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think as well, the sort of, it wasn't like they were locked into their vertical lanes. Like quite often you saw them sort of hunting a pack almost. So it wasn't as if Paquetá had Soler on the pitch to find, but he was 30 yards away, and every time it needed to be a floated, like lofted ball over to switch, they were sort of always around each other to play these 1-2s and free each other out of space. And I think, considering this is the first time we've really seen them play together for an extended period of time in a match in those roles, I think that's really pleasing to see and really exciting actually moving forward. And I think the only other thing I wanted to say about them two in midfield, sorry if you can hear the sirens going past, that's South London at its finest. But yeah, I think there was a stat that I saw after the game. I believe, I'm pretty sure it was that West Ham performance is the second most amount of ground that a team has covered this season. I think it was 119.6k, second only to a Spurs performance, and we all know how much ground Andrew's got everyone covering. And I think something that we've talked about a lot throughout the season as being a problem is when you play Edson and Guido, for all their strengths, they just cannot cover that space. And I think, to loop back to what we mentioned at the start about how we felt less vulnerable in transition, even though we were still committing fullbacks, albeit not quite as aggressively, I think it was an element of us just being able to cover so much more ground in midfield and sort of match Newcastle in terms of how much ground they cover, which is always an impressive amount, and the ability to just arrive in the right space at the right time rather than feeling that you're 2 or 3 beats behind and then sort of backpedaling every time. And I think that probably speaks volumes, and there has to be obviously a correlation between the fact that we've seen those level of team running numbers put in and the sort of engine room of the team itself has been changed dramatically. I mean, we know Souček can cover that ground, right? He's done it his whole career at West Ham. But for those two to come in and see that tick up quite so dramatically, I thought was really noteworthy and really pleasing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned the tenacity and the aggression of the pair. Sometimes you look at these things on paper and you say two sort of more attacking midfielders, and then you're going to lose the physical battle. But this is the first game in ages that I can think of where we really dominated the physical battle. I mean, in the second half, we were dominant in the physical duels against a team that is really known for their ability to win the physical battle, and really has competed at the top of the league, often in large part due to the fact that they're able to win the physical battle and kind of hang their hat on the fact that they're going to win the battle in the midfield. So really impressive to see that from the pair of them. And yeah, we're going to come to many other things. I think I'm glad you also mentioned the counter press with Soler. I mean, we've spoken about that already this season. You see just how impactful these micro moments are when we lose the ball around the edge of the box, and he is already snapping into a tackle on the edge. Whoever is trying to clear it or trying to settle possession for Newcastle would get barely a second because Soler's immediately there to force them to sort of poke it out for a throw or whatever, which massively helps us in terms of how we're able to defend. But more on the team level in terms of the defensive effort, and this wasn't necessarily the case right from the start of the game because we saw some pretty hairy offside trap stuff at the beginning, and it definitely didn't function to its best level. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there still in terms of relationships between the centre-backs. Todibo and Kilman, for the most part, did very well in this game, but there was a little bit of miscommunication at times over when to step up and when to drop off. So we saw some pretty fragmented defensive lines in the first 15, 20, 25 minutes of the game. And really, you could say across the first half, because even Isak gets that chance about 40 minutes into the game, big chance going in behind the defence. Part of that is down to Souček losing the ball whilst we're in our sort of deep build-up shape, and Kilman's really, really deep close to the goalkeeper. But yeah, the big team level change, it's not just in midfield in terms of personnel and that aggression and that ability to cover ground. But yeah, at last, certainly as the game went on, the defensive line dropped. A lower defensive line, Cal. And many people will be listening to this thinking, and I did a shit post on Twitter about how it's basically back to the days of Moyes. I very nearly edited Moyes onto the Star Wars Revenge of the Sith poster. We're taking the piss a little bit because in many ways, lower defensive line doesn't automatically equal 25% of the ball. Or 30% of the ball and pure counterattacks. And I think it's really important to frame that lack of possession that we experienced under David Moyes, certainly late in David Moyes' period as West Ham manager, as being both about out of possession tactics and perhaps even more so about in possession tactics, and an insistence on reaching the opposition box and creating chances in sort of 3 or 4 passes every time we win the ball. And actually what we see in this game is we see a lower defensive line, which really helped us protect our goal. We limited Newcastle fantastically for large parts of the second half. If you're looking at the average shot quality for a lot of this game, it's come way down. Obviously, they have their 2 big moments, but I would put those down to individual errors that we won't see repeating across games, like Todibo giving the ball up in the way that he did for Gordon. It's not something that's structural. That's not a structural defect. That's just a moment from an individual player. Actually, on a structural level, we limited them incredibly well, and we were able to maintain possession because the difference between Lopetegui operating within this kind of system with a bit of a lower defensive line, which is an alteration, a clear alteration from what we've seen so far this season, and how Moyes did it, is there isn't that same desperate insistence on hit Mickey and go straight away and try and create a shooting opportunity immediately. We showed that at the same time, whilst having a bit of a lower defensive line, when we win it, we can still control the game, we can still build through, we can still create different kinds of attacks.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the element I wanted to pick up on, is it felt like we had more control in both phases, like in and out. Whereas I think for Moyes, there was often a lot of, I feel comfortable, like out of possession. I feel like we've got control. We're limiting the opposition. I don't feel like they're going to run away with this. But then we'd get the ball and it would feel chaotic. It would feel frantic. And that was baked into the system, right? We thrived in that chaos. We were meant to thrive in that chaos. Whereas I think that had its benefits, but it did feel one-dimensional at times. And as we know, as soon as opponents kind of worked that out, it became quite difficult to mastermind wins against opposition. Whereas I think this like added element of dynamism where, as you say, you control in a slightly different but not entirely different way out of possession. As you say, you drop the line, you still defend narrow. I think that was one of the really pleasing things actually from both fullbacks, but particularly Emerson. I thought we saw the fullbacks tucked in a lot more, and I think it left us, I think it was mentioned in the commentary even, but it left us a lot less vulnerable to deliveries to the back post, because Emerson particularly was able to just stick a leg out and poke it away before it got there. I think it was about like not having to defend the back post if you give the first person to the ball because of how narrow you are. You're closer to the ball. Just
and balls into the channels, situations where the centre backs get split. So much of that was kind of stopped by the back four being much more narrow, and actually more activity from the wingers dropping in and being the players that are going to stop crosses and stuff like that, which is, you do have to say, very classic David Moyes at West Ham over the last few years.
Yeah, 100%, but something we've not seen loads of so far this season. So nice to see that come and work really well. But yeah, I think just as you said, I think Soler in particular was the one that stood out, but I think also probably Paquetá, when it was sort of defended the box, knocked out to the edge of the box. It was so nice, as you say, to not see us just freak out and be like, right, let's race Newcastle to their goal and see who gets there first. There was a lot more like, you know what, I could actually just put my foot on the ball, pass it back to Kilman, and then everyone get in their position, into the positions that we've been building these attacks in training, because then I know who to hit in what channel, and I know where to go to get to here from A to B to C. And that, I think, is something that, yeah, with hopefully with more time, we'll start to see more often. But yeah, that sort of willingness to be like, you know what, actually we can play this game on our terms when we have the opportunity to do so. But when Newcastle have the ball and are trying to play it on their terms, we know how to sort of circumvent that and dig in and then wait until it's our moment again. And I think, yeah, to see it sort of falling into place on both sides of the coin was really pleasing, but probably especially for Paquetá, because I think throughout the season, whether it's in his own half or whether it's in the opposition half, there has been that tendency to just slingshot it forward and hope something sticks in a sort of classic Moyesian way, I suppose. But I sort of looked at the numbers after, and I was expecting Paquetá's numbers to, just because he had a good game, be really high on progressive, but it actually wasn't that his progressive passing numbers were that high, which I think speaks to the fact that I came away from the game thinking his passing performance was great, but his progressive pass was low. So therefore it's like, oh, finally he's shifted back towards a sort of, oh, I'm just going to pass it short and play medium to short passes and keep it ticking over, which is the direction that we've wanted Paquetá to head in for a while for it to work in the system. And I think the first game that we truly see it, it all starts to click as a team. And again, I think there's clearly some correlation there.
Yeah, just much better balance now. You know,
yeah.
Paquetá not progressing with so much risk that we end up lacking control, but still progressing when the moment arises to do so, still creating when the moment arises to do so. You know, nice pass through for Souček to hit one on the spin. Great ball over the top for Bowen, who got in behind and forced the foul out of Lloyd Kelly. I think Bowen probably scores there if Kelly doesn't make the foul and get booked. So, you know, still had his big high impact moments as a creator for the team. The progression better shared, as we've already discussed with Soler, and also in terms of the in possession approach. You know, it's not just one or the other. It's not completely black or white. It's not that, well, you either do the thing where you race Newcastle to their goal and desperately try and create a counter-attacking chance straight away, or you stabilise with the ball and you try and dominate possession. You know, what I loved about this performance is that we had both. You know, in the right moments, we went and played off Antonio. We went and used Summerville and Bowen to counter aggressively, to carry aggressively, and to get us forward as quickly as possible. A couple of moments where Antonio did a brilliant job rolling to the outside, very old-fashioned Antonio stuff, you know, out into the wide areas, dribble someone, win a corner. You know, great to see that stuff still happening in the right moments to do it. And then when it's not on, or when Newcastle have recovered quickly enough, we saw situations maybe where, and this happened a lot more in the second half, which was why the second half, big part of why the second half was so good. You know, maybe break a line, maybe do get a carry off of Summerville, and then he thinks, well, they've got 3-4 players back, I'm going to turn out now, go back to Kilman. Kilman's going to kill the pressure, because Gordon could not rush Kilman for love nor money in this game, which is the best thing about, well, one of many amazing things about Max Kilman. And then we would just be able to...
I remember him in the second half just doing a back heel. I was like, bro, this is. I've been waiting.
Yeah. I mean, there were countless moments. He was fantastic, and we'll come on to his performance later. The last thing in this top of the pod section that I want to talk about, and it's a big thing for us. We've been whinging about this, and I think quite rightly, because it's been a huge issue for this team. It's the biggest area of development by a mile for me that we saw in this match. Rest defence has arrived in East London and it somehow arrived first up in the north. But look, 3-2, stick to it and do it flexibly. And the flexibly element of it is absolutely central here. We have been speaking about just a dogmatic insistence to the idea that the number 6 would split the centre backs, and that would be how we achieved our back three defensively. And we have seen us do it repeatedly with Guido Rodriguez or Edson Alvarez, who then haven't had the legs to cover in the defensive transition situations they've then been faced with. In this game, at last, we see it being given as a team-wide collective responsibility, maintain the three. So Emerson drops in, forms part of a back three when wan-bissaka goes. When Emerson goes, wan-bissaka might come round on the cover and do it. Souček might drop out of his number 10 position and come back to centre-back. I loved a moment in the second half, I think it was.
Kilman went on a run and Souček dropped into left centre back.
Yes, absolutely. My favourite moment of the game. Kilman went and broke two lines, carried the ball forward, and Souček, who started off the striker, sprinted the other way past Kilman on a diagonal run all the way to left centre back. And I thought, at last, someone has spoken to this group about the importance of defending. And it was great to see. I even loved early in the game, there was a situation where wan-bissaka bombed on and Emerson went and covered. Arms up, shouting to Summerville, you get out to the left flank. I'm not going. It's your job now to maintain the width of the side in attack. So it's not just about keeping the three. It's also about keeping that width in attack. And then another moment that summed up Łukasz Paquetá, I thought, it's classic him, is it became his responsibility to cover right centre-back on one occasion, and he didn't quite get there, but he made a big effort of putting his arms out and pointing in the direction that he was running to make it clear that he knew he had to be there. So, just brilliant to see everyone in the team so well aware of the importance of that and sharing the responsibility for it, which made, I think, everyone better as a result.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the perfect way to loop this whole section together. As we said at the start, that for the first time, for team-wide reasons, we felt as though we were far less vulnerable, even though we still saw the upside of wan-bissaka and Emerson getting on. Like, Emerson obviously gets the assist, wan-bissaka gets a goal. Like, it's probably the best output we've seen collectively from our fullbacks, which we've wanted to see all season. And it's happened in a game where, at the same time, we've looked far less vulnerable in transition and in defence, and yet we're getting both, and that's what we need. And like you say, it's balance. It's finally arrived. And
isn't that part of taking that's part of the process for me, is that you take, if you look at the whole first section of the season, they've been committed so high and there's been so much pressure on them to create when they've arrived in those situations in the final third. And I think that's probably stifled some of their ability to be at their best as attackers. Whereas in this game, where they're sharing the responsibility exactly the same way we're describing with Soler and Paquetá, where they know it's one goes, one stays, and it's not every single time I've got to be on the last line, I've got to create something, the entire attack depends on me doing it. There are periods of the game where actually, Emerson's doing it now and I can sit in and cover and be part of the defence. And actually it's a little bit more of a shared responsibility. There are going to be situations where I can drive on the inside, as he did in this game, and for his goal, wan-bissaka and Bowen's going to be on the outside. Just way more flexible about how we're going to defend as a team and how we're going to attack as a team, rather than this really kind of, sort of cookie cutter imposer formation on a group of players, and therefore different people just have very clear responsibilities outlined that maybe don't get the best out of them. Just see that job sharing and that ability of kind of the team now has the responsibility for all of these different things, which makes people more relaxed and gives people more chance of showing their best form on the pitch, I feel.
100%, and also for longer, because it's energy conservation. Like, if you're not having to bomb up and down every single time we move up the pitch, and actually you're taking it's one every two now, because Emerson goes and I chill, wan-bissaka's gone, Emerson's going to chill. You're doing half the amount of sprints, but you have the energy to do the tracking back when you do make the run forward. I think we've seen so many times this season where wan-bissaka's, I think probably fair to say, overutilised or overly relied upon, because everything was going through him. And we saw him, once he'd done the final action in the final third, not really making any effort to run back, which is frustrating to watch as a fan, but also at the same time as a player. If you just don't have the energy to run back because you're constantly being asked to run 100 or so meters up and down the pitch every few minutes, it kind of makes sense. So I think we saw against Newcastle countless times, like wan-bissaka getting back and making those last-ditch interventions and tracking his winger all the way back beyond Bowen, who did a commendable job, I must say, at tracking the fullbacks anyway. But sort of seeing wan-bissaka, again, like I say, have that positive upside both in attack and defensively, I think is in large parts because of the balance, the sort of job share, if you will, of being the offensive fullback. It means that he's got twice the amount of energy, and I think it culminates in this fact that for the first time probably all season, apart from obviously the knock on Todibo, Lopetegui didn't see fit to make any substitutions until the 75th minute. And it's in part because the system was functioning, so he didn't want to change it. And the fitness levels were there because everyone was having to do slightly less because everyone was bought in and doing it as a collective rather than an individual.
Yeah, exactly, and that loops back around to what you said about the distance covered as a team. You know, achieving our best distance covered across the season comes as a result of lesser demands on the individuals and greater demands on the team producing that output. So, yeah, really positive, and a fantastic, important step in the right direction at a key moment in the season. We had to turn this corner before the run into the Christmas period. And thank God we've at least made the first step in the right direction before this period of intense football coming up, where really it can define the season, how many points you pick up in this run of games. Well, after all that chat about the team and job sharing and less pressure on individuals, let's go on to the individual performance review section of the podcast, where we get to talk about all of our favourite performances from this game. The first thing to say is that we got a team level, of course, that was much greater, and therefore all of the individual performances were generally quite strong in this game. I don't think we had a single standout weak performer really in this game. Everyone had a good game, but we did have a standout top performer, and Jarrod Bowen. Wow. We were saying before the pod, maybe Max Kilman against Crystal Palace runs it close, but this is probably quite comfortably the best individual performance of the season, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so. A lot to say, really. I think ultimately, as you've put it, best performance from Bowen this season, best performance from any West Ham player this season. Okay, the bar's not been especially high, but it was an incredible performance. I think the top line number, 9 shot creating actions, far and away more than anyone else in the entire game, but definitely far and away above any West Ham performer. And I think at a time where there's been criticism of whether he's perhaps the best captain for the club, at a time when his manager's job is on the line and a performance and a result was probably needed, it felt as though he really took on all of that responsibility, took it on his shoulders, strapped it to his back and decided to carry it for the entire game, turned up for his manager, probably kept him a job to some extent. I don't know if Lopetegui would have gone after this if we'd have lost, especially with Arsenal next, but I think these 3 points will keep him in the job regardless now of what happens against Arsenal and probably Leicester, because it's such a crucial 3 points at such a crucial part of the season away from home in a hostile environment. St James's Park, obviously not an easy place to go at all, and they turned a good lick of form as well in the last few games. So yeah, for Bowen to turn up and just take all that on, silence the doubters is probably a bit strong, but I'm sure he's been feeling the pressure, as every West Ham player would, but also as a new captain at the club. Like, yeah, really, really impressive. And in particular, just, I know that he's like a decent ball carrier. I don't think of him in the same like sort of vein as Kudus in terms of that. I think he's a lot more like just sort of robust as a carrier. But the deftness that he showed, like flicking it between people's legs, just not losing the ball, and then the ability to play perfectly weighted passes through at the right moment to a ball receiver to sort of maintain that move, rather than what we sometimes see where he runs and runs and then he's kind of down a blind alley and then we have to turn around and go backwards. Like, it always felt as though there was an end goal, and I thought that was really impressive, obviously on top of the sort of shot creating stuff in and around the box. Yeah,
led by example. I think he's going to be that kind of captain, and he did that in the best possible way in this game. I think he's come on a bit as a ball carrier as well. I think we saw that in this match. I was looking at some of the data across the season so far. He's right there near the top this season for total number of take-ons. He's smashing it in terms of his completion rate as well. I mean, him and Kudus are just kind of out there as outliers in the Premier League at the moment. There are a few players that go with them for being able to produce the sheer volume and also do it at a consistent rate without losing the ball. I think of Doku, Savio or Savinho is in there as well. Adama Traore is having a very good season from that perspective as well. who else can I think of? There are a couple of others. I'm sure I'll remember them as we go. But they're right at the top of the Premier League for these metrics. I think they come out as 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 in the Premier League for total number of carries completed each. So, total number of take-ons completed each. So I think he's definitely improved significantly as a carrier, and I think probably the team dynamics are helping him a bit there as well, because he can come inside, he can dribble on the outside, whereas beforehand it was probably a little bit more structured in terms of how the team lined up, and he was receiving the ball from so far, and that probably impacted the way in which he was able to carry somewhat. Well, definitely impacted the way in which he was able to carry. You spoke about his attacking stuff, and you know it's the West Ham Breakdown podcast. It's Analytics United, the classic yin and yang. Cal goes on about all the fun stuff, and I come back to ruin it with all the boring bollocks. Defensively, he was brilliant. This was a clinic. This was a nailed on perfect winger's performance from a defensive perspective. He did everything brilliantly. He had one moment where he got drawn to the ball with Souček, and I think it's Lewis Hall got away from the pair of them, and it looked quite slapstick because the ball went straight through, and Hall was able to cross kind of for free. And he had one moment where he was in the box and didn't clear the box with a defensive header, and then wan-bissaka couldn't bring the ball down. It was all a bit chaotic. Save those two moments, he was put under a huge amount of pressure over the course of the game. Newcastle had a lot of pressure in the wide area specifically, and that's down to the way that we defended as a team. We forced them into those areas, and Bowen was just brilliant at making it nigh on impossible to create anything from that side. Blocked crosses, covered excellently. I think even right at the start of the game, immediately remarked sort of 10 minutes into the game or less, on a moment where wan-bissaka jumped forward to support the press. Bowen had already pressed, and then Newcastle sort of bounced through, and it was his man sort of running beyond Bowen then to get on the end of this 1-2. And he just anticipated it just in time, made the burst, and then sliding tackle, got there first, and then generated actually a positive attacking situation for us. It was perfect. It was a perfect defensive performance from a winger. And when you run that alongside how well he did on the ball as an attacker for the team, you really can't get better. It was a clear 10 out of 10 man of the match, best player on the pitch performance. And from a player who really probably hasn't been rewarded enough in terms of the, just the output, the numbers, goals and assists for how well he has actually played this season. He hasn't really had a bad game. He's played pretty well for the whole season. I think obviously we've talked a lot about how limiting the structure has been for him, and the fact that we've seen him kind of marginalized a little bit as a goal scorer. But with that extra flexibility that we saw in the team in kind of in every sense in this match, this was the first time where I sort of thought, yeah, this could really go somewhere for him, with the ability to kind of run across the attack, not just being pigeonholed into that one spot on the right, often ending up wide on the right as a provider, because wan-bissaka's not doing enough. So then Bowen drifts out there more so, and wan-bissaka starts coming into sort of the right hand space just kind of as a placeholder, so that Bowen can do more and create more in the 1v1s and crossing situations. It wasn't just that in this game. Obviously, he does create a goal from doing exactly what I've just described. But we also see those moments where he's coming all the way across the attack, running from that right-hand side all the way to the left side, running beyond the striker. More involved to someone who's dropping off and combining in deeper areas to set positive attacking dynamics to them for us to spring forward from deep build-up. I just thought all around an excellent performance and a real positive looking road ahead for him for the first time, I would say, this season, where I can see routes for him being far more impactful for us across the course of the season, which is vital, really. He's our best player by a mile, and he needs to be able to be as impactful as he was in this game week in, week out. Obviously, he's not going to be able to produce that level week in, week out, but if he can get close and is enabled to get as close as possible by the system, then we'll be in a good place as a team as a result. Two other players to speak about. I'll start with one we've spoken a lot about already this season. We've spoken about already on this podcast. This I know it was a lot of money, but this was just such an unbelievably good signing for the football club to have a English centre half coming into his prime years, who's going to spend those years with us, performing at the level that he is. it's just a luxury. Maximilian Kilman is just sensational, and continues to be kind of without ever wavering. It's a huge thing for the team. Not just this season, but in future seasons, like I say, the way that he defends the box, the way that he plays out from the back, the way that he completely nullifies opposition pressure. He's just a sensational footballer, isn't he? I'd be stunned, and it would be completely unfair if he doesn't make his way into the England squad for the next set of internationals, obviously, providing he maintains this level of form.
Yeah, I think so. And unfortunately, I think it's probably going to be tied to the fact that it will be tied in some part to West Ham performances as well. I think probably the reason he's been overlooked at the minute is because of where West Ham are in the league, and therefore, I don't know. I would like to think they do a lot more due diligence than this, but I think based on the fact that West Ham have been pretty porous defensively, you just assume, I'm not going to bother looking at the English centre-back there when I've got X, Y, Z elsewhere. But if Max Kilman can sort of marshal that defence and West Ham start to sort of turn the ship and steer it in the right direction up the table, and Kilman's performances continue to be central to anything good at West Ham, then yeah, it would be crazy not to consider that, particularly when you think Thomas Tuchel's coming in. I mean, what did he used to do with those centre-backs, bro? Ball carrying Antonio Rudiger, just blitzing up the pitch. Like, it's a match made in heaven, right? Physical beast of a centre-back who's defensively competent, especially defending the channels, but gives you such an upside under pressure, and also in terms of being able to carry through the press. Like, it feels like the perfect centre-back for someone like Thomas Tuchel to bring in. Whether he plays a back four or a three at the back system, who knows? But either way, the system is the same in terms of the way it functions, and Kilman would be amazing for it.
I'm not an England fan, but the idea of having him and Levi Colwill as your options at left centre back is just outrageous. I mean, what an unbelievable luxury to have. I mean, Levi Colwill this season with a double line breakers is killing me every time I watch Chelsea. It's just like I'm creating assists from my own 6-yard box. Like, it's a ridiculous player on the ball, and Kilman has all of that, I think, but also just an unbelievable dual dominance. Like, he's just so good physically, handles himself amazingly in the duels. So, yeah, incredibly impressed with him. And we should speak also about Łukasz Paquetá, who, yeah,
bossed it.
Yeah. This if we can get Paquetá at that kind of level, even if maybe in the last 20 minutes I think he fancied himself a little bit. So, I'm having a really good game, I'm going to start giving the ball away and doing silly things again. If we can get him anything like that for a decent run of games, especially for this run of games coming up where we've got some really advantageous fixtures, we'll be in a really good place, because when he plays like that, the team plays well as a result. And he looked every bit the player that he has been previously at West Ham once again in this match.
Yeah, 100%. Much more balanced. I think what was most pleasing for me, and it's a bit of a strange one to pick out, but I think it will be important, and it was particularly important in this game given the potential consequences, but the tenacity that he played with, but without picking up a yellow, which is something that you kind of come to expect for Paquetá. And Paquetá was, if he was going to get a yellow, would miss the Arsenal game. And obviously coming off the back of such a good team performance, you want to basically roll out with the same 11 if you can. And yeah, to have him available for that Arsenal match on the back of that performance when the team needs to start to really gel and click, I think is so important. But I think generally across the team, sort of, there were questions asked after the Forest game, particularly in the wake of that Alvarez red card and sort of a lack of discipline seeping into the team, potentially coming from frustration, potentially coming from confusion, potentially coming from players being asked to do things that they can't actually do and therefore having to resort to lashing out or overextending or lunging into challenges, etc. So I think to see the sort of performance across the board from the team executed so well, but with that sort of perfectly fine-tuned balance between tenacity and aggression, but without overstepping the mark and picking up silly yellows, was really, again, super pleasing to see, and shows that there's a lot of maybe more buy-in than we would all have assumed based on the back of results and performances. And yeah, another pleasing thing to see. And I would say as well, I think for a game that was quite snappy, I'd say. It's not often that I would do this, but I thought it was pretty well refereed as well. There was only one yellow, I think. That's how what I felt having watched it. I think just in terms of letting things go, I don't know if all the decisions were necessarily given the right way, but in terms of managing the game and allowing it to maintain that bite without just being like, here you go, yellow, yellow, yellow. I know they booked Lopetegui, and that was probably fair enough because he was going nuts within the first 20 minutes. But just in terms of not being stupid and being like, right, Bruno, yellow, like it was 50-50 on most challenges, and there was a bite to the game. But I think because the bite was coming from both sides, the fact that the referee could see that and be like, you know what, I'm not going to book anyone, you're all at it, and that's fine. I thought that was pretty good to see. But yeah, I agree that not every decision was given correctly in favour of the right team.
It is possible to foul Mikel Antonio. You wouldn't know, but it is possible. Yeah, and I'm sure people want us to mention it. I didn't think it was a penalty. I know a lot of people did think it was a penalty, and we were lucky to get away with it. I think it's very close to being a penalty, but I think if Wilson had managed to get up earlier, he would have had more of a case. But because he didn't, and because he's slowing down, and because Mavropanos ends up looking like he's the only player actually trying to win the ball, even if he's having to jump all over Wilson to get there, I think it makes it quite easy to call it 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So close, Callum. Try again. And if we ever deserve any kind of cheese against any footballer in the world,
it's that Donny.
It's Callum Wilson. So I will keep my notes incredibly short and snappy because I know no one wants to hear it in a positive podcast. We mentioned Fabiański did really well, dominated the box, made saves when he had to. Big save from Anthony Gordon. He's done really well since coming into the team. We do need a goalkeeper that can build up without losing the ball all the time. He did manage to pull off a couple of nice dribbles when under pressure. I think
there was one moment I thought it'd gone out for a corner. It didn't, but my God, my heart was in my mouth.
Yeah, I know. I love that he's really taken to it though. That he's he's properly trying his best to do the thing. It's just that when the passes actually come, he's not necessarily that accurate. I love the moment in the game where he went long to Souček and fell a long way short, and Newcastle player got there, headed it out. I think it might have gone all the way back out for a goal kick or for a throw in or something, and Souček just looked at him and just pointed upwards. It's a long ball, mate. Yeah, hi. Very much enjoyed that. And then Crysencio Summerville, who I think has done a good job since coming into the team. I think there's a lot of development that needs to happen there defensively. I think he can come on a long way. Tracking the fullback needs to develop quickly. I think someone needs to sit with him, show him some clips, because over his performances so far, it is a bit of a theme that when a fullback passes inwards, his head follows the ball inwards, and he loses where the fullback is completely. And when we defend in the way that we did in this game, which I think is a step in the right direction and the way that we should probably defend going forward, definitely in away games, it is really important that he tracks those fullback runs and makes it very difficult for the fullback to get crosses into the box. So a key area for development going forward for him, should he want to keep a place in the starting 11. Okay, so we're on to the final section of the podcast where it's my turn to be a villain, as per. And we've talked about it a few times over the course of the season. We've spoken about it on Extra Time Pods. We're going to speak about it in more depth today in the second half of today's podcast, which you can get on patreon.com/Analytics United. First week free. We've got loads of stuff coming out there. It's all obviously all getting very busy now. So we've got preview pods up the wazoo, and breakdown pods and Euro reviews and other such stuff. Scouting to come as well. Darcy and I are about to start working incredibly hard, looking at lots of different players that we could sign, or we should sign, or we should at least be looking at in January. But yeah, the thing we're going to speak about is the squad as it is and what is it built for. And I think this game is a perfect blueprint for the fact that we have a cast of really dual dominant defenders. Todibo incredible in the ground duels. Mavropanos top in the entire Premier League for aerial duels, and that's every position. You've got Kilman, who's really good at both sides. Wan-bissaka, who's probably known as the most dual dominant fullback in world football, I would say, really, definitely in the Premier League, and the Premier League's best league in the world. So, I think he's up there as one of the best defensive fullbacks around. I'm particularly speaking about the duels, not necessarily positioning and all the rest of it, but the duels. He handles those very, very well. And Emerson, over the course of the last 2 seasons, he's probably the weakest of the lot when it comes to duels. But even like last season, he was standing out massively for his tackling numbers, amount of tackles he was producing, and how successful he was in the ground duels. When you think you've got Edson Alvarez, who's a real duel dominator in front of that. You've got Tomas Soucek, who's very much the same. You've got Soler and Paquetá, who are really tenacious. I think it's really clear, at least to me, that a mid-block, a slightly lower line, plays to our strengths, basically, in terms of the players that we have in the back line and in the midfield.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for all the reasons you said, I mean, it's there. I think there is an element for me. Not that I don't agree. It's just like I think I spoke to you yesterday about it. It's like there is an element of frustration in me of like this is where we are and therefore this is the best. But it doesn't mean that I'm pleased that this is where we are. Like I'd love us to play a slightly higher line because I think that's where we should have been heading. But profile-wise, we don't really have the legs in midfield to be able to cover those, and therefore it makes sense for the midfield and the defence to be more compact and sort of really shut up shop in the middle. And yeah, as you say, we've got the profiles. We don't have sort of long-distance runners, but we've got guys that can cover ground and arrive at the right moment at pace and snap into those challenges as we saw in this game. So yeah, in terms of playing to the strengths, definitely makes sense. I think centre-backs probably as well, really. I think you could probably get away with playing a higher line with the defence, but I think it is that sort of lack of the midfield profile that forces you back, essentially. Doesn't mean that we can't head also, in that direction, but
also that the defenders are really good in it, as we're saying, in the duels. Exactly, so it's not that okay, this doesn't work for them, they would be better in a high line, which maybe was the case with someone like Naifa Gerd. We looked at him and thought, okay, he doesn't really work so well in a mid to low block. He probably wants to be higher at the pitch, because the situations where he does work quite well is when he is running back to his own goal and being forced to make, sliding tackles, all the rest of it. Like Kilman and Todibo can do that stuff, but they're also quite good deeper as well. Mavropanos is a brilliant option to have deeper. It's not like these players can only do one or the other, and that's a fantastic luxury to have in the back line. You've got that flexibility. It works either way. Works for them, and I think maybe you have an argument that it works a bit better for the group as a mid to low block with the fullbacks. I think the fullbacks, we've seen Emerson at times can be late to get forward and slow to recover. Wan-Bissaka defensive positioning been a big question mark so far this season. So simplifying things for those guys as well as the midfielders might help us quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, and the other thing to say in midfield is, basically, I think we'd have to spend quite a lot of money to solve the issue. You're going to have to shell out quite a lot to get someone who can give us the tempo control that we need to be the kind of team that Lopetegui wants us to be long term. And I think it's okay to step back and say, we've made some progress in this window, but maybe we need a couple more to get to exactly where we want to be. It's going to cost quite a lot of money to get that kind of tempo controller, and then you're going to have to offset that with someone who can really eat ground and win duels. And at the moment, we've kind of got Edson Alvarez, who can cover quite a lot of ground, but doesn't do it quickly enough, and isn't dominant enough as a space covering duel winning midfielder to offset for having like both. Say Paquetá and Soler pushed high up the pitch in more of a kind of 4-3-3 structure where you're going out to press quite aggressively. And in Guido Rodriguez, unfortunately, just can't cover the spaces in the Premier League and in the way that you need when you're playing that kind of structure. And Soucek, he does cover ground. He's much like James Ward-Prowse. They cover a lot of space. They just don't do it very fast. So you're just going to have to spend an awful lot of money on getting someone that can win duels and run really quick. I mean, they cost usually over 100 million quid. And that's what happened with Declan Rice going to Arsenal. They're very difficult to find, and we really don't have that kind of player in the squad. I imagine the hope would have been that Edson Alvarez could have been that guy for us this season, and he just kind of has failed the tests so far. I think the thought would have been Rodriguez as more of kind of the tempo dictator, with the defensive qualities to be able to cope, and then Edson Alvarez to kind of cover the ground to make up for the fact that he's not someone that can cover so much space. It just hasn't worked really this season. So I think it's okay to step back and acknowledge maybe we need some more time, maybe we need to invest some more money into this, and we need to change the midfield quite significantly. But what can we do in the here and the now? And like I say, got great dual dominators, got players that are really tenacious in the middle of the pitch, good at maybe covering a bit less space or not being asked to cover so much space so quickly. And you can control the space they have to cover by playing a bit more of a mid block, being a bit more reserved. That doesn't mean that you lose the counter press. Like I think we saw in this game, you can still be really aggressive when you first lose the ball, but you have to have that ability to then know, okay, maybe you go for one, maybe you go for two, and then after that it's recover. And we saw situations in this game maybe where Bowen would go after the ball pressing, or Soler would go after the ball pressing. They'd turn around and go, come on, get up the pitch. And then everyone will be, you'd have the other players behind going, no, we're not doing that today. And I think that works for us a little bit better for where we are right now. And it's worth also saying that combines really well with the attacking players we have available. We just spoke about Bowen and Kudus as carriers. We see how deadly we can be when given few opportunities in the final third. Souček doesn't need many chances to score. Bowen really doesn't need many chances to score. Kudus, that's his road for development, but he should become one of those players because his ball striking is excellent, where he doesn't need many chances to score. We've got players that should be really excellent on turnover for us. And like I say, it's not one track. We're not going to be going back to being David Moyes counters and counters only. We've got the ability to play through, build up through the middle as well. We've got the ability to control games much better. And we saw that in the second half against Newcastle. So why not lean more heavily in that direction? Pretty much a just very premium version of what West Ham were when we went on the Europa League run. That was a counter-attacking side where the mad intensity of it all was being offset by the presence of Manuel Lanzini, often in games or starting or off the bench as a midfielder, who would come and slow things down and try and get us controlling the ball a little bit better. Now we just have so many more profiles who can give us that, and actually better players as across the pitch as dual dominators, as counter-attacking enablers. We've just got better players to be able to do that at a really high level. So I would certainly really like to see us lean that way for this season to get results and to get some confidence in the group, and then go again in the summer. If Lopetegui is still here, great. If he's continuing to do what he's shown in the last match, and go again in the summer and refresh the midfield department so we can move more towards where we want to be long term, or lots of change in the summer, both at managerial level and at personnel level to move more heavily in that perceived right direction, definitely the direction that the club wants to move in.
Yeah, I can agree more. I think the point towards the end there was one that I wanted to touch on myself in terms of it was the first game I think this season where what we had posited at the start of the season sort of started to click in my head, and that being disappointment was never going to be the jump straight away from counter to control. It was going to be a bit of counter or a bit of mid-low block with elements of control added in, so that eventually you can reach the end point where control is plan A and counter is plan B. Whereas at the minute, I think we sort of have a plan AB, if that makes sense. It's like A and B together. It's like counter with control, whereas counter was before and then control will be it. Whether that's, like you say, Lopetegui, because he's the man that guides us there, and he ditches the counter element once he has a more stacked squad of profiles that can deliver on that, whether that's more shuttlers that can do the whole 9 yards in midfield and cover the entire pitch, so therefore we don't have to drop into that mid-block quite so often, or whether it's because we have more players that are comfortable knocking the ball around for longer periods of time and sort of cutting defences open rather than relying on pacing behind or sort of the longer elements of the game, so to speak. And I think for the first time it's really felt as though that was the sort of move. It wasn't just what we were sort of suggesting was the right direction, but that the club also saw it in that way. It's like they've brought in a manager who can do both, and then we can either divest of the manager and bring someone in to complete that transition and take us to control, or we can provide Lopetegui with the tools if he proves that he's the man to be trusted, and let him take us there himself, which I think is really positive. And the only other thing I wanted to say is that I don't want people to listen and think that we're advocating for sort of increased passivity when we say drop the deeper line and drop to a mid-block. You can still be an incredibly aggressive team, but play deeper. Like, I mean, Newcastle are probably a perfect example, right? I think what you said about the counter
So
press,
many teams are this season. So many teams
Emery as well. Like, you don't have to play a stupidly aggressive high press. You can commit to the counter press for, like you say, the first 2 or 3 passes, and then drop into your mid block, sit off, but then just choose like an arbitrary marker, usually the halfway line, where you go, okay, the ball is now across the halfway line. Everybody press the shit out of them, and sort of, you just have that compactness that makes it a lot more difficult for people to break you down and get in behind, but still with the added plus sides of the counter, the press rather, and also the benefits for us of, if we win that turnover closer to our own goal, there's then way more space for us to attack into, which suits the profiles that we've got, as we say, rather than if you play the really gung-ho, high line, high press. Yes, it'd be great to force those high turnovers, but as we've seen, I don't know that we have necessarily the perfect profiles of players at the minute to be able to just instantly sort of turn it into that goal scoring opportunity from the high press, because I'm not sure the full supporting cast would necessarily be there.
Well, Paquetá hasn't
exactly
been at the level that he would need to be at, and Frocka hasn't been fit, and they would be 2 absolutely vital players to being able to provide exactly what we need in those high turnover moments. So and that's without saying all the stuff we've already said before, where we just don't have the physicality in midfield to be able to cover the ground, to be able to create enough of those scenarios in games where we're not just giving up silly chances with balls over the top or conceding big chances in transition. I think what you say is absolutely right. This is the first game, second half of this match is the first time we saw the happy medium that we were all imagining in the best case scenario. That was it.
And I think we've seen what the end goal is, but without the profiles. I think that's what the first 10 games have been, right? It's like dogmatic commitment to the end goal before we actually have the people to take us to the end goal. And now we've gone back to like, oh, actually, I forgot that my remit was to aid the transition, not just be the finished product straight away. And we've sort of, in this game, shifted things around. And I think, it's weird. It's almost like he's gone, I want to be in this job for a while, so I'm going to just show them what they could have if they give me the right profiles. And then I'm going to go back and then make the case for, look, if you give me the right players, I can do what I was doing for a few games, and it would actually work this time around. So, yeah, it's interesting. In a weird, bizarre way, it kind of gives me hope of like, actually, if we had all of the perfect players, maybe Lopetegui's crazy dogmatic ideology would work. But yeah, as you say, to wrap it up, we're heading in the right direction based on one game, which is an incredibly small sample size, but reason to be positive regardless.
I love that you said it before I did. I was going to close on, we're a serious analysis podcast that's not results driven at all. Look, last note for the pod is, and I'll give this one to you, Cal, to finish. It's been a real struggle, but points wise, it doesn't look too bad with the games to come now, right?
That's it. I mean, it feels almost hypocritical of us to sit here and me make this point given how critical we have been throughout the season. But I think everyone listening will understand that that's what we're here to do, and we'd be liars if we hadn't been critical. However, remarkably, we're 4 points off Europe. So all is not lost. Like, if this is a sign of the direction of travel and we can turn that performance out regularly whilst improving, I will add, because if we turn out that exact performance regularly, I don't know that we will get to the heights that we want to reach. We need to create more. The XG number was relatively low. We probably should have conceded 1 based on the quality of chances that we conceded. But as we said, those chances conceded probably came from individual errors. And you can expect that we'll create more when Kudus comes into the team, when hopefully Fulkrug is fitter, because it will allow Bowen to become slightly more involved in combination play, get more goal scoring opportunities, etc. So if this is a sign of what's to come and all of those pieces fall into place around it, we are still in with a shot of qualifying for Europe this season, as crazy as that might sound, given what a bad start to the season we have had. Obviously, as we've said, it's a small case study, but all is not lost. We're on the same amount of points as Bournemouth, who, by all accounts, are having a great season. We're really only a point or 2 off United, 4 points off Spurs. So, yeah, I think fingers crossed we can kick on, maybe spend a bit of dough in January or bring in some smart loans just to really pad out that profile gap, I guess, if we want to call it that. But, yeah, it seems like the ship has been turned around and now we just need to put the sails on and start moving forward.
it's turning around, and we've ambled through a really difficult period for the football club where performance and structure were both pretty combining pretty horribly to lead to sort of bad output on the pitch. We've ambled through actually with an okay enough points total now that we've won this game to really attack the the last 2/3 of the season, with a feeling that we haven't completely lost an opportunity to compete at the level that we want to. That's a lot of pressure on the group, but this is the time now to really show it. It's not just about one performance. It's now these next 7 games, Arsenal and Liverpool both at home, big tests, but opportunities to show the direction we're moving in, and then some more winnable looking fixtures in between to really show what we're about, and hopefully we do just that and have a wonderful Christmas. So yeah, come on you Irons is the upshot. I'm really pleased with what we saw. The first window into sustainability, a real positive performance under Julian Lopetegui. So fantastic stuff. We'll catch you next week, which will be just before a midweek game, and then we'll give a brief note on Leicester at the top of the following podcast before doing a proper review of the match afterwards, which will be Wolves. So we'll see you then.